I'd like to, we can go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Jen. I also have my other Jen who is here, but on mute and not right in front of us. We are the chairs of ACE, which is the Autism Committee. We are going to have a presentation tonight on restraint and seclusion. We'd like to go ahead and get started. I know we also have, sorry, I'm a little disjointed at the moment because it's a little loud and crazy over here, so I apologize for that. Cody, please go in the other room. Thank you. And so why don't we go ahead and get started off with Gary, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes, just kind of give us a brief update of anything that you can on what's going on in the district, and let us know if you have any updates.
Sure. First of all, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for having me and saying a few words. I just want to update, the latest and greatest of what's going on. We had our Excellence in Virtual Learning a week ago, Monday. That was really well attended. They highlighted families and students that were excelling in e-learning. I thought that was a really nice event that took the place of our Just Do It Awards that we do every year. Since we couldn't do that live, we did it virtually, and we wanted to celebrate because it was such a challenge for our kids and families doing e-learning. So it was a really nice event. As we're going into the spring season now, we're almost hitting about a year of COVID close down, as we call it, in another month. We are continuing to encourage our students to come back on campus whenever possible. Of course, it's the family's choice, but our teachers are more willing and able, and the ones that are seeing the kids are, we're starting to see, and I was just in the classroom the other day, and it's so nice to see the instruction live and everybody connecting again. So I think that's, as we go into the spring, we're going to get more and more normal, we all hope, and hopefully we'll be back, in full force next August, and the world of e-learning will be history. Maybe not. We may, maybe we'll all see each other at an ACE meeting live also next year. We're continuing to do our projections for our ASD special programs. I think I told those on the call last month, our numbers have pretty much stabilized this year, although the district's enrollment has gone down. The numbers of students with autism and special needs in general has actually creeped up just a little bit, not like it used to, especially with ASD, but the numbers are creeping up and the enrollment of district is going down. So, just as you're out and about, and you may read in the paper or hear people talking about Broward's enrollment is down, it's not down for students with disabilities. And I think that's really important to note that our students are still here, and we're still providing instruction and still asking or needing the resources that we've always needed to teach them in our classrooms. The other thing is we did meet with our certification people or recruitment people last week because we do recognize sort of the void of good quality teachers in special education, particularly in ASD. So we're a little excited to do some new things, some orientations and recruitment activities with our talent development department to try to get more people in the door and get the right people in the door in our classrooms. So more to come on that. I would ask anybody who is, if you know people who have degrees or have teaching degrees, send them our way. If there's any interest in education, I know a lot of people have lost jobs or maybe looking for another career. But in your travels, we need parents to help us and community members also to help us recruit. Let us know if you know somebody is interested, because we can do a lot of pre-training and on, pre-service and an on-site training with people. And some of our best teachers as well as paraprofessionals come from another career. So we're really starting to focus on that piece too, because as you've paid attention, not only in Broward, but nationally, there's a shortage of teachers, and an even stronger shortage of teachers in special education, as well as like math and science and some of those more unique subjects. So just if, anybody, that, put out a good word. Teaching is great. It's exciting. It's, despite what you hear, it's a decent salary. It's not great, but it is a decent salary with benefits, all those things that go with teaching, and certainly rewarding. So, anybody that can help us with that. Like I said, you may know a neighbor, a child, your own child, a niece or a nephew. We've got to start putting a more positive spin on what it's like to be a teacher, and how rewarding and what a career it could be. I'm on 33 years in education, and I'm still here. And people after the first year, they either stay or they don't. So we're hoping to get more of those kind of people. So just, that's about it from the district right now. And I'll stay on if there are any questions, and certainly listen to the presentation tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sorry, my brain is so gone tonight. I have Stephanie Rivera here. I can't even speak correctly. Stephanie, if you'd like to hop on, and she's from the Dan Marino Foundation, and she wanted to share with us some things that they have coming up.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. I wanted to keep it short and sweet. I didn't know what was the itinerary for this meeting, but I'm Stephanie Rivera. I'm the admissions representative for the Dan Marino Foundation. We have two initiatives. We have the Marino campus and the Academy. It's for individuals 18 and older. So if you know of anyone that is a senior this year or has already graduated, the Dan Marino Foundation has the Marino campus, which is a post-secondary school geared towards employment for individuals with autism and any other developmental disability. Our main goal is to help them find employment. We have certification-based programs. They have social skills courses and employment courses. We find them an internship in their programs. So we have computer technology, business office support, and hospitality. So those are our three industries where they can receive certifications, and we'll find them an internship. And then it's 10 months. We start classes in September of this year. It's in downtown Fort Lauderdale. The students are coming into classes at this time wearing masks, social distancing. So that's a great thing that we have been able to do. So if you know of anyone that would be interested, please, I'm going to share my contact in the chat. And then the Dan Marino Foundation also has the Academy, which is more of a community-based program. We paired them up with a mentor, and then they will have access to different community events that we may set up or set up for them. So we'll have something like maybe painting with a twist. We'll have, karaoke, live karaoke, which would be through Zoom. So we have some different events that we have set up. So Marino Camp is more post-secondary school. So they do have classes Monday through Friday, and the Academy is more community-based. These are members of the Academy. Again, it's for individuals that are 18 and older. So if you know of anyone, and we have open houses scheduled for this month and information sessions. So I'm going to put our website and all that information in the chat. But it's really just to spreading the word of, what we have at the Dan Marino Foundation, and sharing different resources, which is very important to do in this community. So I just thank you for inviting me, and I'm so happy that I found it. And I just wanted to share that information with you all. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Stephanie. And then now on to the main presentation. Steve, if you would like to take the floor, it is all yours.
Hey, good evening. This isn't going to be, Broward centric at all, but it's going to be more about a statewide effort to hopefully finally pass bills in our legislature that will ban seclusion rooms and limit the use of restraint to when it's more reasonable. I'll start off by telling you my story. My son is 25 now. Matt has autism. He's basically nonverbal. He has seizures, and he has a couple of other behaviors as well. I don't know if Matt was ever restrained or put into a seclusion cell, because he was basically out of school by the time they started to record that. But he being nonverbal, he wouldn't be able to tell us if he was ever restrained or not. And so every day, every one of us has to send our children to school and hope that every teacher, every aide, every administrator, every therapist, every bus driver, every cafeteria worker, and especially every school resource officer treat our children appropriately and with all due respect. You know, a lot of our kids are nonverbal or have very difficult time communicating specific things that might happen in their day. And we have to blindly trust the schools to do what's right for them. Unfortunately, when it comes to restraint, there's very few limits on it. And I'll get to that in a minute. Here in Broward, the district closed their seclusion cells several years ago. And that's exactly what they are. They're seclusion cells. They're cells. They're not rooms. They're not calming rooms. They're cells. Before the Sunset School closed several years ago, I had an opportunity to tour one of those cells. And basically, I was in a room that was about 18 feet square. There was 3 doors across one wall, bathroom, 2 seclusion rooms. The seclusion cells were about 7 foot by 7 foot square. They had vinyl coated padding on the walls. I could reach out and just about touch the 2 walls. That's how big they were. There was a small window in the door, and there was a camera, which I was told was motion activated up in the corner. You know, it was very eerie when I asked them to close the door behind me, and I heard that click, and the muffled kind of noise in that room from all the padding made a very, very strange feeling. And I was just imagining what it would be like to be a little kid in crisis getting tossed into that room without knowing when they were going to open the door. And, you know, just like Broward has closed their seclusion rooms, more than half the districts in the state have followed suit and closed theirs as well. So I'll get to the mechanics of that in a few minutes, but there has been more progress made in the reduction of the use of seclusion in the state than in restraint. In 2018, which is the last year that we have a full non-COVID year of data, there were 824 seclusions throughout Florida, 824. 47 of them lasted more than an hour. Now that's a major improvement from the first year that data was being reported back in 2011, when there were over 4,600 seclusions, with 300 of them lasting over 1 hour. Over 1 hour in a padded cell, some of them 2 hours or longer. Georgia closed their seclusion cells in 2014 after a student hung himself to death in a seclusion cell. And I'll get to more of that in just a minute. I'm going to show you a little presentation now. Yep. This is what restraint looks like. It's typically more than 2 adults taking a child and holding them standing, sitting, or sometimes bringing them down to the floor face down in what's called a prone restraint, and holding them immobile until they either are exhausted or get quiet or calm down, and then they're released, hopefully slowly. Again, these happen thousands of times in the state, and the distribution of it is what's so very disturbing. We'll get to that in a second. It did get a lot of coverage back when the state started to record these events. Back in 2010 was the first year that this data had to be recorded and sent to the state. The Palm Beach posted this front page story, and the following year, the Orlando Sentinel did this front page story. Restraining Orange, Hillsborough, Broward, St. John's were big time out of the mainstream as far as the numbers go on restraint. The very first year that these data had to be taken, Orange County accounted for over 70% of the state's overall restraints. They're still the leader in restraints. Made national news. It was a big deal nationally for several years back then. You know, it's lost steam because all this happened 10 years ago, and you can't keep up the pace that they did back when this first came to light back at the beginning of this last decade. You know, it's difficult enough to keep pressure on for a short period of time, but for a decade, it starts to get difficult. The New York Times did a story, and this is what a seclusion cell looks like. You know, padded walls, click the door, not pretty at all. There's been bills at the national level in Washington, D.C. And I have this slide specifically because I want you to really note selected cases of death and abuse at public and private schools. There are a number of students have died while being restrained. And like I mentioned, a student hung himself in Georgia in a seclusion cell. This can be a very dangerous intervention. And most of the time, as you'll see in a minute, they're really unnecessary. They're used inappropriately. Dr. Crimmins, who he testified before the Senate Help Committee in 2010 or 2012, I beg your pardon. He's got credentials. He runs a lot of stuff up there, and he's very involved in restrained seclusion. This is what he said to the State Senate Help Committee in 2012. They're not evidence-based techniques. The important part here is that they can deepen negative behavior patterns and undermine a child's trust and capacity for learning. I mean, students are in school to learn. And no therapeutic or educational use. Moreover, the danger is well documented, and that's, you know, the cost benefit. I mean, is there a positive effect, and what is the negative side of this? The children have been traumatized, injured, even killed after being restrained, and as I mentioned, even committed suicide. And this is the sad part here. All too often, seclusion and restraint are used for non-dangerous behaviors to force compliance or for convenience. Now, in Florida, there is no limit on the use of restraint or why a student may be restrained. In the reporting section of the law, it says that the teacher, whoever did the restraining, has to describe what imminent risk occurred to cause the restraint, but that's in the reporting section. The real truth of the matter is that anyone trained in any district's chosen method of restraint can restrain any disabled student for any reason or for any length of time, and it's perfectly legal. You know, I find that disturbing. And as you can see here, this is from a TAP, the Department of Education Technical Assistance paper. Does the law stop the use of restrained seclusion? No. You know, are there any restrictions on the use of restrained seclusion? Yes. And I love this. We call this the Motel 6 clause. When you throw a kid into a seclusion cell, you have to leave the light on. Now, just think for a moment why that would have to be in state law. 9 districts in Florida still use mechanical restraint. Mechanical restraint can be a variety of things. It can be handcuffs, it can be tie wraps, it can be Velcro closures, it can be straitjackets. This is a Rifkin chair that you see here, which is typically used for kids that can't physically hold themselves in a sitting position. But using it as a physical or mechanical restraint is an abuse of its use. The mechanical restraint is still being used in these districts, although its use has dropped off. The ultimate restraint. We're going to see a demonstration of the use of this in just a minute. I called around to some of the districts that are leading the way on stopping the use of seclusion and reducing the use of restraint. Palm Beach County was one of the first counties to limit the use of restraint to only when there was an imminent risk of danger to the students or others. And I talked to Jeff Silverman, who's their director of the ESE department. And what he told me was that there was no response to the enacting of the policy. There was virtually no complaints. I also asked Will Gordillo, because it had come up that they were concerned that it would cause a spike in Baker Acts if we were to limit the use of restraint and close the seclusion rooms. And Will reported that no, that wasn't the case there. And I might say that when we closed the seclusion cells here in Broward County, one of the school board members asked the ESE department to check and see if they had seen a spike in Baker Acts. And the number of Baker Acts are so small that statistically it was difficult to say, but basically the answer was no. I think there was one more Baker Act a year later than there was the previous time, which isn't statistically significant. Rick Stevens, Georgia, because of that young man that unfortunately hung himself in a seclusion cell, adopted all these laws in 2014, quite some time ago. So they have quite a bit of history with this. They basically reported the same thing that Palm Beach County reported, that when they closed their seclusion cells and restricted the use of restraint, that no one really had a problem with it. No one jumped up and down and said, oh my goodness, this is terrible. We lost these tools and what are we going to do? The sky is falling. Overall, I believe the rule has had an important positive impact on public education in Georgia. Now, that was the response to closing seclusion cells and limiting the use of restraint. This is a story that I wrote to kind of demonstrate the lawmakers back about 10 years ago about a little girl. Jane was 7 years old and she wishes that her teachers and aides would stop restraining her. She was just thirsty. She was trying to tell them that. And when they insisted that she sit quietly at her desk, she had a little fit. Two aides forced her to the floor and held her so she couldn't move. You know, Jane's inability to move scared her. She has problems processing language and is nonverbal, and being restrained upset her. But because she was immobilized and unable to communicate, it panicked her, which just increased the duration of restraint because of her struggles. This happens. And unfortunately, these kids end up being restrained until they're exhausted. Some of these restraints go on for a very long time, often hour plus. Get out of this. So restraint, to describe it, you know, and I did briefly, it's a violent act. You know, it's where two or more adults will grab a kid, hold them against their will, usually when they're in crisis, because that's why they're being restrained, and then sometimes take them to the floor in what's known as a prone restraint. Now, the bill doesn't ban restraint. If a kid's going to run in front of a car, if he's going to pick up a brick and hit some other kid upside the head with it, you know, I want somebody to step in and restrain the child and keep him from hurting himself or somebody else. So there are times when restraint is appropriate. It's also important to note that 50% of the restraints that happen in Florida are pre-K through third graders. 50% little 5, 6, 7-year-old kids. You know, is it really necessary, you know, to do this to these little kids in such a way? Did we really try to de-escalate the situation? You know, did somebody perhaps escalate rather than de-escalate a situation to the point where restraint needed to be used when it could have easily been avoided? And when I show you some of the statistics later on, you're going to see that from district to district is a very different story. I'm about to show you a type of mechanical restraint that was on one of the slides before. Orange County used what they call the rat mat, which the manufacturer calls the ultimate restraint. It's a, the assistant principal or the principal that's doing the narration of this demonstration is nice and calm. We put the child and carefully lower him to the floor and leave them there until they calm and de-escalate, and it has a calming effect. And well, what do you see what they think is calming?
I'm not hearing her audio.
Steve, you need to share your audio. You need to share your audio.
Steve, I don't know if there's a way to change the audio on that so that we can hear what she's saying, or if you could just give us a brief rundown.
I had it turned up all the way.
I don't know. You can just tell us what's going on.
Well, you know, what she basically says is that the students are lowered into this gently. They're left there to calm themselves. You know, they're basically wrapped up like a fish in a newspaper to flop around on the floor. She says they're left there to, when they calm themselves and they're released, hopefully they're reintroduced back to the classroom. She does say that they only use this if there's a imminent risk of danger to the student or others. But again, when we get to the data side of it, you'll see that that would be a little bit difficult to believe. And this does happen in a center school in Orange County. This is not a contract school. This is a center school. What the bills in Florida right now, and this is the 10th year for these bills, says, and again, they don't they don't ban restraint, but they do ban seclusion. And this is, I'm quoting directly from the bill. Authorized school personnel may use restraint only when all positive behavior interventions and supports have been exhausted. Restraint may be used only when there is an imminent risk of serious injury and shall be discontinued as soon as the threat posed by the dangerous behavior is dissipated. A lot of the opposition to this bill will make it sound like we're trying to ban the use of restraint. And you got to be real clear that this bill does not ban restraint. It bans inappropriate restraint and limits the use of restraint, which right now is completely unlimited. This bill is in its 13th year, these bills. They, in 2010, the legislature eventually passed a bill that instead of restricting restraint and banning seclusion, it required data reporting so the legislature could determine if there was a problem or not. Almost immediately, what most people would consider a problem became apparent. What the legislature did was hope that just reporting and bringing the use of restraint and seclusion into the daylight would reduce the use of these interventions. This happened with mixed results. And as I mentioned, over half the districts in the state have stopped using seclusion. The numbers went from 4,600 in 2011 to 744 in 2019. Now that's a significant reduction. And of course, it also helps that half the districts in the state close their seclusion cells. No one could come up with any data that indicated that seclusion had any therapeutic or educational value, and therefore was not evidence-based. Restraint also reduced from 10,500 times kids were restrained against their will in 2011 to 8,650 in 2019. The problem is that not all districts appear to have gotten the memo. This is what I was alluding to a few minutes ago, as far as excuse me for just a minute while I get to where I need to be. Let me try this again. Okay. Sorry. I'm just going to leave. All right. Is the PowerPoint up?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Let me get down here. When I tried to, this is Broward County's policy here. If the district, and this is from their SPMP. SPMP is a state document, and the upper portion of this is a fixed language that the SPMP is supplied by the state. And then what's in bold is what the district answers the question. Part of the rules or part of the law that was passed in about 2015 as a little bone that they taught to restraint seclusion was that the districts had to provide a goal for reducing the use of restraint. And Broward said that we're going to reduce it by at least 2%. Total number of incidents of restraint for these 3 years right here. And believe it or not, 192, 155, 185 incidents is actually pretty low given the 38,000 ESE students that there are in Broward County. And you'll see that in a graph that we're going to have here in just a minute. The district needed to provide a rationale for why there was a decrease or an increase. And we'll come back to this slide in a minute, but I want to go to this one. You know, as you can see, Dade and Broward, the two largest school districts in the state, and this is from 2017, 2018, 111 and 191 restraints out of a total population of 70,000 ESE students for the two counties combined. Right, that's like that's like 300 restraints for 70,000 students. Hillsborough, 489. Orange, 1,021. Pasco, 408. You know, Seminole, 532. St. Johns County with 5,000 ESE students, 957 restraints. You know, Broward and Dade combined had 300 restraints with 70,000 students. St. John's had 957 restraints with just 5,000. You know, there's something going on here. And this is why we really need to have the state pass these bills that will bring some uniformity to the use of restraint throughout the state so that these numbers aren't all over the place, so that more of these districts look like 111 and 191 instead of 1,021. And that's what the intent of the bill is just to bring some uniformity and some common sense. We should try to de-escalate the situation. We should try to redirect. We should take the kid for a walk. We should remove him from the classroom. We should stop whatever is disturbing him. We should try to de-escalate the situation before we go hands-on. And then we should only do it if there's a real risk of danger. You know, too often, and obviously I think anybody looking at these numbers would say there's got to be something going on here, that any of these numbers have to be, anything that's over a given percentage of the students' population is abuse. You know, there's no reason why Dade and Broward can restrain 300 students out of 70,000, and Orange County can justify over 1,000 restraints out of a 21,000 student population. You know, that's abuse. I'm sorry. There's just no way around it. And Orange County has been a leader in restraint from the first time that they had to report back in 2011. It's always been Orange County and Hillsborough back and forth, with districts like Pasco and St. John's always kind of like being big numbers, but given the size of their populations, very outsized in the use of restraint. So basically that's what I've got. Jen has posted some information on a on how to help. The two committees that the bills are first referred to is the Florida Senate's Education Committee and the House's subcommittee on education, and among the items that she's got posted are lists of people on those committees with their phone numbers and their email addresses. And then there's also a little script that I wrote. Feel free to personalize it. Feel free to do whatever you'd like to do to tell your story to the aides and the representatives that you'll be talking to and ask them to support the bill. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I've put the link right there, so feel free if anyone has any questions. I know there were some things typed in the chat that does get lost easily. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask. I know we don't have a gigantor group tonight, so feel free to just unmute and ask. It's fine with me.
Hi, Jen. This is Melissa Ramos. I understand that like our officers are not supposed to restrain students, but I just wanted to know in Broward specifically, has there been a case where a principal has used their resources for that?
Yes.
Yes.
That's why I asked Jennifer. Yep. Okay.
More than one
Thanks,
case.
Steve.
You know, there's been cases of in a center school. The video is readily available on the internet at YouTube of an SRO body slamming a little girl who tapped him on the back of the knee. The whole event is caught from the time she actually touched him, which is a very light touch, until she obviously may have said something to him to incite him, but he grabs her and slams her to the floor. There was another school not too long ago where SRO threw a kid over his shoulder and carried him out to the principal's office, I believe it was. There's been several cases of that. And that's why I say
But do you
SROs,
see they're having less seclusion and less restraint? They're just going to like, okay, well, let me just go to the policeman at our school and let him handle it. So that's what I'm getting at. It's just,
and I'm very concerned. And I'm very concerned that may happen too, but the rules say that they're not supposed to do that. You know, and of course the rules get broken all the time. So that's the problem. And the schools and the various police departments will do the finger pointing game. You know, the district will say that the SRO isn't an employee of the school district. He's an employee of Broward County Sheriff's Office or of Sunrise Police Service, you know, or Pembroke Pines. And the school and the police department will basically cover up and say the officer acted appropriately. And that's usually the end of it, and that's as far as it gets. In that one case I'm talking about, that officer was fired, who body slammed that girl at that center school. But more often than not, it's a wink and a nod, and they go about their business. There was a case where the ESE advisory brought it to the attention of the district about a principal who had a SRO come in and threatened to handcuff a student who was in crisis. And that principal had, I believe, 3 days without pay off as a result of that, which, you know, I applaud. One of the very few cases of accountability that we've seen in this district. But, and there's a couple other questions here too. Training, the training that they use in Broward is called PCM, Professional Crisis Management. And actually, Professional Crisis Management, or PCM, does a very good job of training de-escalation techniques before they train how to actually restrain a student. They have various levels or tiers of training that they give. And the first couple of tiers are all about how not to restrain. Unfortunately, in the field, at the schools, a lot of times staff tends to hopscotch over some of those issues. And, you know, understandably, I can see the scenarios occurring where you've got an ASD cluster classroom with a teacher and maybe 1 or 2 aides, and the aides are constantly being pulled out of those classes to do other things. And somebody who acts up, and, you know, somebody needs to go to the bathroom, and all of a sudden they're very, very short-handed, and some kid has something that happens that gets them all excited, and they don't have the staff to appropriately de-escalate the situation. So they end up allowing it to escalate to the point where they have to restrain. And I'm just guessing that this is the kind of thing that happens. But they are trained, you know, in Broward counties, in any county for that matter. The law says that any staff that go hands-on with a student have to be trained in that district's choice of restraint. And in this county and in several other counties around the state, it's professional crisis management. There's a handful of companies that offer this training. one of the things that they do at PCM, Professional Crisis Management, is prone restraint, where they grab a kid and bring him face down to the floor and hold him there. And that's one of the most dangerous types of restraint.
I see Allie has her hand up. So Allie, if you want to.
I just want to, hey, how you doing? I just want to make sure that I want to, that I've picked up on any questions that might be here in chat. Okay, yeah. These centers make the parents sign a permission document to restrain a student when necessary. They don't need to. They can anyway. That may be just a way to give parents a heads up that, that they do that, but there's nothing in state law and nothing in Broward County policy that says that somebody trained in that district's use of restraint, PCM, can't restrain a child. And the reasoning, it doesn't need to be there. There literally is no reason that they have to give to restrain a student. And that's one of the more disturbing things that exists now, and something that we would prefer to see end. The center, it'll probably come to me in a minute. I've forgotten right now. There's only a couple of centers. Gary may remember which one it was, but Cross Creek, was it? I'm not sure. Yes, all right. Hey, Allie, go ahead and jump in there.
Hey, you guys. So Steve's been working on this a lot longer than I have, but when I met him and you know, I have a lot of people know we have really personal lived experience with this. And so what I wanted to share was touching back what he had talked about sometimes with the quote, calming rooms. And about 4 years ago, the previous chair, Kelly Bush, visited all of the ASD self-contained classrooms. And at that time, I visited all of the EBD, emotional behavioral self-contained classrooms. And literally, while I was there with a curriculum supervisor, a child was being inappropriately secluded in a room alone with an adult sitting in front of the door on a chair supervising. So even though they don't have the padded rooms in the self-contained classrooms anymore or the center schools, it still happens. So it's very important as parents just to be really communicative with your staff, and however your child is able to communicate with you about what is going on. And then calling your legislators. And if you have any personal lived experience with it, Steve very, very graciously recorded my son speaking to the school board in 2014, right before they closed the rooms, because we had made a motion as a body to close those seclusion rooms. And I use that video every single year when this bill comes up. And so that was, I can't even think right now because it's so late, but that was like, what, 7 years ago, Steve?
Yeah.
It was a ridiculously long time ago. And there's a national movement for it also. There's national legislation called Keeping All Students Safe that Bobby Scott might bring up again. But obviously we need to deal with our backyard. So I just wanted to, pipe in. I miss you guys so much. I miss my Broward family. And this topic is so close to home that I just had to come, throw my 2 cents in and say hi.
Yeah, Bob, and what Allie described is seclusion by definition, according to the way the state defines seclusion. If you put a kid in a room and block the kid from leaving the room, it's seclusion. The district can tap dance around that all they want, but it is seclusion by definition. And that's all very carefully called out in existing legislation. So I see Danilo's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I know there's been a lot of efforts to get training for Broward School staff, especially behavior techs. When Dr. Hetman was around heading ESC, they were training for ABA so that their aim was to not have to do this restraint, so that they could exhaust behavior interventions before any handling of the kids would happen. I'm just wondering, I don't know if there's an update on that, if there's been more training, if actually the behavior techs have any kind of certification now, because I remember about 1.5 years ago, when my kids started middle school, our behavior tech at our school, which is a very large school, did not even have RBT certification, which is the lowest level certification in ABA training. And that was a very big flag for me. They didn't have the appropriate certification or even the lowest level of certification, and they were permitted to restrain our kids. And the policy also was very vague on whether or not kids could be restrained in the general education setting, or whether they could be restrained in the ESC classroom. So there was a lot of questions back and forth about that. And I remember 6th grade was very rocky for us because there was a lot of gray that came out, at least for us in our personal experiences. So I'm still somewhat concerned about that, because I don't know if training has been followed up on, or if this effort has been, kind of went away with Dr. Hickman, or what happened to that for the behavior techs. And I just, I'm mostly concerned because of, because ABA training is, I guess, Dr. Hickman kept calling it the gold standard, I guess, for behavior interventions.
There's no gray area. And I noticed that you missed the beginning of the meeting. Perhaps you didn't hear me explain. The way current state law and Broward policy is that anybody trained in a district's chosen method of restraint, and in Broward it's PCM, professional crisis management, anybody who's trained in that to the tier that allows them to put hands on and restrain a student, they can restrain a student for any reason and for any length of time.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything different in the state law. It doesn't say anything different in the district SPMP. So the guiding document in this case is the state statute. And the state statute is silent on any reason. Where the reason comes in is in the reporting standards, but not in as far as any kind of a prohibition. So technically, anybody trained can restrain any student for any reason and for any length of time.
I heard you what you said about PCM training. I know that our behavior tech has been trained in PCM for sure, and I know that that was the only actual training that they could actually share with us that he's had. There's really nothing else they could share with us about ABA training or anything else, which was a concern to us even now. I guess we're doing virtual e-learning at this point, but when our kids go back to school, it's a concern still to find out if there's prevention strategies rather than, all these prevention strategies, like you said, the escalation with PCM is really important that they learn that, but also all the ABA strategies are really important as well.
Well, the PCM is ABA. Professional crisis management, the people who lead that are, one of them, Merrill Winston, is a BCBA D. He's a PhD in ABA. Him and his wife, who's a BCABA, or at least was the last time I checked, have a staff of people. And the first couple of tiers of restraint training is how not to restrain. And it's specific. It's not what a behavior tech would get for behavior, and generally. It's very specific towards de-escalation and not having to restrain. And a lot of teachers, for instance, will get the first couple of tiers of training on how to de-escalate, but decline how to put hands on a student, because a teacher doesn't want to be the one to restrain a student, because he doesn't want that negative connection to the teacher. They'd much rather have it from somebody on the quote PCM team. So very often it will be administrators, it will be behavior techs, it will be somebody from outside the classroom that's called in to restrain the student. But ultimately, or not ultimately, but typically it's the teacher that makes the call on that. And a lot of teachers refuse to take that tier of PCM training because they do not want to go hands-on. Now, you know, the district has their behavior techs and they train them in a specific way for a specific reason, however they like, and they call them a behavior tech. And it allows them to have more behavior techs without as much training as somebody who has to go through the training to become an RBT, or heaven forbid, a BCABA or BCBA.
Yeah.
You know, there's only a handful of BCBAs in the district that I'm aware of that are actually in the field, and maybe a couple handfuls of BCABAs. And of course, some people are getting RBT training, but that doesn't, I don't think, carry a whole lot of weight as far as a credential with the district, because, and you know this better than I do, Danilo, is that, you know, the district doesn't think very highly of RBT training. So, you know, and I do believe in the PCM training. I do believe that if the staff that's trained in the early tiers of PCM training employ the techniques that they're trained to use, that there would be less restraints.
Yes, that's right. I believe, my wife is telling me that she has PCM training herself, and we understand that training that needs to happen and that has happened is important. I just think maybe our committee could follow up with maybe with some of the staff, like at the district level, to find out if there's more training offered and if there's something that can happen that will prevent these kinds of, you know.
Yeah, I just want to, Jen, and I might suggest that one of your future topics, we can bring in one of our BCBA. I know Pam Torelli, I think, did a presentation for parent advisory. We could probably bring, I mean, if you want, we can arrange to have her come and do a session, you know, a training here at one of our ACE meetings on behavior. I don't think we've hit it in about 2 years. I know 2 years ago, we had some of the coaches that were BCBAs, I think, did a nice training. I remember we were at Bodwin, but we can certainly cover that. I will say that Dr. Hickman, what he did a couple of years ago, he committed to having all of our paraprofessionals at the time go through an ABA training. I mean, as mandatory as we can make it. We had a wide swath of them go through the ABA course.
That's great.
I'm not sure if how that's going right now, only because I'm sort of on the behavior side right now. They do positive behavioral support is our main training for any teacher and anybody dealing with behavior. So, and a lot of that is dealt with determining what the function of behavior is and designing preventative strategies. And again, the PCM, I haven't been through it in years. I was probably one of the originals. The prevention is the biggest emphasis of PCM, and Steve is right. There's a lot of employees that do the prevention part and don't go to the other tier, either because they don't feel comfortable doing restraining, or they just want that first part because they feel they could be a more effective educator. But Jen, that may be a topic we want to do later in the spring, just focusing on ABA again.
Yeah, for that.
Thank you.
Gary, did I describe everything fairly accurately from a district employee point of view?
Steve, I've learned a lot. I never knew the orange can. Some of the data was excellent as far as what we're doing. I do want to say that, I mean, for the most, there's always a couple of bad seeds, and you guys help us find those, and we find a lot of them too. Nobody wants to restrain. I truly believe nobody wants to put hands on a kid. And in Broward, I think that is, I'm really happy to see some data. I know Beth Williams has shared that with us at our staff meetings about some of the restraint data from Broward, how it's been going down, but it's not perfect. I just will say, from an educator and somebody who taught students with autism, I don't find that it is an effective strategy with students with autism. I don't know about some of the other disabilities, but students with autism specifically, to put hands on a kid when they're in crisis is only going to make them go further into crisis. So philosophically, I'm with you right there, and I'm really glad to see some of our numbers are going down, because that's always an uncomfortable part as an educator. That's not what we do.
And to be clear, Broward County has done an excellent job of limiting the use of restraint and closing the seclusion cells. So, the other districts in the state that seem to be really problematic on, and as you described, hopefully What did you think of my description of the ASD cluster classroom that had an aide pulled out to go to carpool or lunch or something, and now they're shorthanded and a kid goes into crisis?
That's a typical day. Yeah,
exactly.
That is a typical day.
And the staffing levels in these schools, and to just get off topic, I'm sorry to cut you off, and to get off topic for a second though, you know, when they call a code red while the classroom is short-staffed and they've got a kid in a wheelchair and 2 runners with 9 students and 2 adults, how are they supposed to evacuate that classroom? You know, staffing is a biggest part of this whole problem, and it's not exclusive to the use of restraint, but it also crosses over into all kinds of behaviors and all kinds of other issues. And classroom staffing, from what I understand right now, with the crisis and COVID and all that going on, is very low, and dangerously so, I believe, in some classrooms. I'm sorry to have cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. Anytime we can get more staff and more quality trained staff, that's why I started off actually by saying we are asking you all to help us recruit people that really want to be in the classroom and teach. And COVID, yes, you mentioned that, Steve. That is what principals are dealing with on a daily basis. You know, they'll come in one day and 3 of their staff are quarantined for 14 days. It's amazing what schools are able to do right now in this situation. But yeah, staffing, I mean, the more staff we have, obviously the more quality staff, sometimes too many staff. And a lot of the issues happen when not only are they short-staffed, or they may be short-staffed or not short-staffed, it's a lot of times by people outside the classroom that get involved. And the people that know the kids best are the ones that really need to do the interventions, the proactive interventions, and even when students are in crisis, how to deal with a student when they're in crisis, because they know the student best. It's not an ideal situation when an assistant principal comes in, or a principal, or even a district employee comes in, because those are people that don't know the precursors, the situation, the reinforcers, and everything that we can do to de-escalate a student when they're in crisis. So
would the ESLS department entertain addressing the school board on a policy about a strict division of responsibility for SROs? You know, I mean, I don't believe an SRO should be putting hands on a student unless they're about to arrest them. You know, school staff are trained to hands-on students. That's what PCM training is. SROs are trained to deal with criminals, you know, and you can see that in that Cross Creek video, you know, the way that SRO handled that situation, where if it had been necessary to restrain that student, it would have been done very differently. SROs have no, and I sat through the presentation by that major at one of our meetings who described the SROs and what they're supposed to do. But this finger pointing game that goes on between the police departments and the district when one of these events occur doesn't move the ball forward. You know, if the school district had a specific policy that said, school staff is hands-on unless you're about to arrest the kid, put them in handcuffs and throw them in the back of a cruiser. You know, and that's appropriate in certain circumstances, you know, but that's the only situation. And again, half of the restraints in this state, and I think it was 47% last year in Broward, are pre-K through 3rd graders. And my concern is that we've got SROs in elementary schools now that we never had before since MSD, and that we're going to have an SRO dealing with a 5 or a 6-year-old kid that's in crisis, and he's going to treat him like an adult criminal. And that's not necessary, it's not safe, and it's not appropriate in any circumstances.
Right. And I will say that recently, I'm not sure when it started, but you know, our SROs, there has been an effort. I know last year there was training for the SROs on disabilities and impacted disabilities. So I think that is a good start. You know, as far as, you know, entertaining a policy, that's certainly something that, you know, might go through the advisory, if that's something that you guys are looking into. You know, I don't, like I said, I'm here for the our kids with autism and our, you know, to listen to the presentation. I don't know, you know, I certainly take that back.
Take it back, please. I think that a real simple policy that the schools are trained to do this and the SROs are trained to do that. Let them stay in their lane and let the schools handle the students until they cross that line of criminality when an officer does need to become involved. You know, you got a couple of high school students pulling knives, somebody needs to get handcuffed and thrown in the back of a cruiser. You know, you get a 5-year-old kid having a tantrum because somebody took a sippy cup, the police don't need to be called. And it happens. Anybody else got a question? Danilo, I see you got your hand up again.
No, I just wanted to mention that about a year and a half ago, there was, this is just a remaining thought. By the way, thank you for sharing your thoughts, Steve, on what you know about our Broward schools. And also, Gary, thank you so much for your viewpoint, your perspective of what's happening also with the training for our staff. I just wanted to ask maybe Gary or Steve, if students are allowed to be restrained in the general education setting, in general education classrooms, because from what I learned about a year ago, they were not allowed to be restrained in the actual classroom. They had to be taken out of the classroom for them to be restrained. Now, that's not necessarily the case for kids in the cluster programs. They can be restrained within their classrooms. Do any of you have thoughts on this? And do you know something I do not know, or am I mistaken on that policy being district-wide?
No.
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm not aware of any policy that says where a kid can or can't be restrained. I have not personally heard that a student can't be restrained in a general education class, but
I know that I've seen or I've had reports of students restrained in the driveway. You know, when one of them was going to, had a meltdown when daddy was late, and he's out in the driveway on the sidewalk waiting for a car to pick him up, and he's lost it, and they've had to take him down outside, in front of the school. I don't think a place comes into that. Allie, I see you just came up. I found Z-Man's presentation before the school board. You got a second? You'd like me to play it with Jen's permission?
I think it would be fabulous, because whenever our children find their voice to share it, the decision makers listen to our kids much more than they listen to us. And they can restrain your kid anywhere. Unless it's changed, my kid was restrained in every aspect of his campus when he was in school.
Okay, unfortunately, I did a YouTube video a few minutes ago, and there was no audio. So I don't know if I'm gonna have the problem with this as well, but at least you'll get to see Z-Man do his thing. And with Jen's permission, I'll put that up real quick. It's only a minute or two long.
Yeah, go for it. See if we can get, if not, maybe I can make Allie presenter and she can try.
Oh, I don't have the video, but you can always put the link in the comments, Steve, and then they can watch on their own time. By the way, guys, he earned his Eagle Scout and he's a sophomore in college now.
I'm getting audio here. You guys hearing this?
No.
No.
Why don't you just put the link and then everyone can watch it, because unfortunately we're not hearing the audio.
Okay.
I almost have it memorized, and the gist is, he said, I was fortunate enough to have a walk and talk, but a lot of other kids didn't. And if you just had a way to, like a river, and kind of let it flow and let the kid tell you what's going on, then maybe we wouldn't need it. And that's a very, very loose paraphrase, but he was only a sophomore there. And he had gone from gen ed to self-contained to an EBD center school, back to gen ed, and then to Atlantic Technical, where he actually graduated with honors. So, I mean, I know that's not everybody's journey, and I'm very sensitive to that, but it can be a lot of people's journey. So if I can do anything to help anybody, You know, you can ask Jen and Steve, I live for this community.
I just put the link into comments of that video. So, and I'll make sure that I've got it on public. I believe at one point I had it private. If that's okay with you, Alicia.
Oh, absolutely. I will be sending it up to Tallahassee again this year.
Okay, very good. There's anything else?
It looks like I had a couple questions from Facebook. It's really okay. It says, are students medically pre-screened prior to restraint? And do you know if parents can have a copy of the PCM training manuals?
No, the best of my knowledge, parents are not privy to PCM training manuals. And you were a little bit broken up. I didn't hear the first part of that question very well at all.
My audio's really messed up. It's students are medically pre-screened prior to restraint.
Yes, there are certain conditions that would be, I forget the terminology for it. Children with Down syndrome, for instance, can't really tolerate much pressure on their chests. Kids with seizures, of course, certain students with physical disabilities should not be restrained in certain ways. So you can write something up. It can be a medical exemption from restraint or certain types of restraint. And you know, once you put a doctor's note on something, that carries some pull with the district because it puts a certain responsibility and liability on the district. So yes, there are medical reasons why they could limit or ban restraint on a particular student.
Okay, I don't have any other specific questions, but Jen, I had that stuff that Jackie had put in chat. My audio is pretty bad, I think. Can you read that by any chance?
Sure, give me 1 second. Sorry, my husband started snoring next to me.
I just don't want to make everyone listen to my garbled audio.
No, it's fine. I'm pulling it up right now. Okay. She said if we could help lobby for teachers to have priority access to the vaccine. It's pinned to the top of our Facebook page. I know if you go on to the district's website, they have the legislative tab and that's on there as well. She also said if we do a virtual resource fair in March, what kind of service providers and vendors do we want or would like to hear about? Things such as like recreational activities, respite care, things like that. And has anyone been denied paper-based accommodations at school due to COVID? And I asked what paper-based meant because I was confused. And it's basically if you are given the option to be able to take a test on paper instead of on the computer, has anyone been restricted from that? That's it.
That's about all I had to say. If anyone else had anything they wanted to bring up or any other questions?
Hi, it's Melissa again. Jennifer, you mentioned, Jackie asked paper-based testing, like whether it's like a math chapter test, and maybe Mr. Gary Gregor will know. For Think Central, a lot of the times they use that at school, even if it's in their accommodations, to have it paper-based. So can we just say, please make sure that it's paper-based and not used through Think Central, like for a math test?
I know there's been some discussion. There's paper-based accommodations for standardized testing. I know the district is actually working through, I believe that came up in the last couple of days, and they're working on some clarification on that piece. As far as paper in the classroom, they're obviously trying to limit the sharing of paper, but there's nothing that prohibits if a student has a test on paper that they can't take that if it's on their IEP.
One more.
Did that answer?
All right, go ahead, Gary.
I was just saying,
Yes,
did that
thank
answer? Okay.
Yes, so they have their books, so they could take the test from their books if they're in class physically. If it's similar to Think Central.
Yeah. I mean, they can take, if it's in their book. I
So
don't
I
know
can
of
say
a policy
Mr. Gary said.
Well,
that they can
there's
take that.
certain circumstances with everything, but if you want to let me know the school, you know, we certainly could follow up with that, or they can.
Oh, okay.
I don't know who's telling them they can't. Let me
No, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yep.
One more thing that Jackie had brought up that I forgot to mention, that iReady. Did anyone by chance hop on the ESC advisories meeting last week? If you did, or even if you didn't, it's recorded and Jackie has posted it onto the ESC advisories Facebook page. But one of the questions that came up was iReady and whether or not our kids were being given accommodations for the iReady diagnostics. I had specific questions about it because my kids were not delivered the accommodations, and I obviously have concerns that it's not accurate. And when we asked in the meeting, Dan Gohl, the chief academic officer for Broward County Schools, mentioned that all of the kids, if they have accommodations, should be given their accommodations while taking the iReady diagnostics. We found the actual paperwork, I guess, or the links from iReady itself, and I have copies on my laptop that I can post onto the ACE page and onto ESC Advisory as well. And then also Felicia, who is one of our other board members, is messaging us that she's having computer issues and she wanted to share the legislative information for senators and other people that are on the education subcommittee. We can post those on our Facebook page as well. Other than that, I think that's all.
Jen posted that, Jennifer. Jen, the other Jen posted that here at the very beginning of the chat messages.
Okay.
I put together a list of the Senate committee, the House committee, and the bill numbers, and a little script to and what to expect when you call the office. So that all may be very helpful, and that should be all up in 3 documents at the very beginning.
Perfect.
You may have to take over, Jen, because Jen's audio doesn't seem to be working.
Okay, I think that was all we had as far as presentations and information from the district, but if anybody had any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself or write something in the chat. If it's something that's personal to you that you don't want to share, you can always email us or Facebook message us, leave something in the chat, we'll contact you that way. Otherwise, I think that's all we've got on our end.
Hey, Jennifer, it's Allie again. There is definitely a bill in about Baker Acts, and I haven't researched this one thoroughly yet, but I believe it's to be to tighten up the who and the how of the Baker Acts, because prior to COVID, the numbers had skyrocketed so ridiculously. So I will do a little bit of research and pop it probably both in the ACE and the general page, but you know, that's something that can affect a lot of different communities.
No, I agree. I remember we had looked into that before, prior to COVID, but after MSD, there was definitely fluctuation in the numbers that we hadn't seen prior to MSD. So that's a good one to look at too. Is everybody good? Everyone's quiet. Okay, I guess we're gonna go ahead and end the meeting. We'll go ahead and post our next meeting for the next month, and we'll come up, we have topics that we're working on with certain presenters. So as soon as we get those locked in, we'll go ahead and send out an email and post it on our respective pages. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Steve, appreciate it.
Thank you all, good night.
Yeah.